think bird photography is all beauty and wonder? Then prepare yourself for the dark side of bird photography.
Well, wasn't that a dramatic entrance today? But you know what? Doesn't change the fact that we do have a very important conversation lined up today, and that is the dark side of bird photography, because believe it or not, there is one. Hey everyone, welcome into Magnolia Photography SC. I'm Jeff House, and I'm a wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. Hey, welcome into today's show. I think this is a pretty important topic that we're going to be talking about today. Now, you may not know some of the things that we're going to talk about today, right? You may not know that they go on, that they exist. I'm sure you'll be familiar with some of them, but maybe not all of them. I'll be interested to see where you stand on these things, what you know, what you don't know, what might be shocking or surprising to you, and maybe there might be something on this list that you're completely fine with. I'm not good, I would say, with probably 99% of the things on today's list personally. That's just me. But I always find these conversations interesting because, quite honestly, I think in the world of photography in general, but especially wildlife photography, I think there's a lot of photographers out there that are extremely judgmental, and many of them who are judgmental also tend to be extremely hypocritical. Now, I'll be honest, I could probably go off on a complete tangent and, just kind of go on my own little rant here. I'll spare you from that today. Maybe that's a topic for another show. But today we're going to talk a little bit about bird photography and the dark side and the things that exist. And I want you to stick with me through this show because I want you at the end of it to share in the comments with me what you think about these different things. I want to know if you agree, you disagree. If there's something you think is okay, let me know that. If there's something that really pisses you off and rubs you the wrong way, let me know that too. I'm really interested to see where people kind of fall on these different types of conversations. So with that being said, let's jump right in and begin with our first example of the dark side of bird photography, and that is baiting birds. Baiting birds using either food or sounds, right? Recorded sounds of their songs, of the noises that they make. What do you think about this? The argument to baiting of birds is that, one, you're going to be doing something that causes a disturbance to the birds and their life and their everyday actions, right? Maybe how they feed, maybe how they communicate with other birds. Are you going to put them in danger by doing this? I actually kind of think you can, especially if you're kind of baiting them with food. Because I think the last thing that we want to do is, with any wild animal, is make them comfortable receiving food from humans. Because let's face it, there are some really awful people out there, and these awful people get a perverse pleasure from torturing wildlife, from hurting wildlife. And so I wouldn't want to do anything that would possibly put wildlife in a position to become more trusting of humans and ultimately have that, hurt them, put them in a very vulnerable situation. I'm not good with that. But there's a lot of other things that people get angry about when it comes to baiting too. I mean, we just talked about the fact that it can disturb them, right? But that adds a lot of stress to their life. Believe it or not, that can add a lot of stress to the life, especially if you're not familiar with bird calls and you don't know what call you're using. Maybe it's a sign, maybe you're using a call of distress, right? You don't maybe not know that. And so you could put that other bird in a lot of stress thinking that maybe, it's hearing one of its species in trouble. And here's another one that really doesn't have anything to do with the birds, has really more to do with us as humans, but I think it's certainly a viable thing. For those of you who get into photo contests, do you want someone submitting photos or even winning the contest or potentially winning the contest using photos in which they baited the bird? I don't, right? I think that's pretty ridiculous personally. That's not the spirit of a photo contest or wildlife inside of a photo contest. Now, I think when we look at wildlife photographers as a whole, I think we have a different creative license, if you will, if we're just kind of taking pictures for ourselves and for the public and for those people who might want to buy our prints or do something along those lines, as compared to a photo that we're capturing that we're going to enter into a photo contest. I think those are two different things, and I think there are some different guidelines and rules that exist there. And what those are to each of us is probably a little bit different, but I do think we can probably agree or recognize that there is something that differentiates those two different situations, right? All right. So that is the first one, guys. That is the baiting of birds using food or using sounds. I want to know what you think on this. Let's take a look at number 2. So number 2 is nesting photography. So this is going to be any kind of photography, kind of like it kind of sounds, right? But this is where we're going to be either in, near, around, right? A bird's nest, trying to get photographs maybe of their babies that they recently had, whatever the case may be. I know that we see some of these things on different media outlets, right? Where there's maybe a camera following a family of eagles who just had some babies, right? But these things are done by researchers. And I think when we're looking at researchers doing these types of things, I really kind of think they're the only people that should be doing this kind of stuff. They're the only people that should be approaching the nests, because we know that the researchers have the bird's best interest in mind, right? Whereas, again, if we're talking about just the everyday photographer, birder, what have you, there's a lot of people out there who do this. And you would like to think that anyone in wildlife photography, likes nature, likes wildlife, you would like to think that they would be respectful people, respectful to the animals. But the truth of the matter is, that's not how it is. A lot of people are super selfish and they don't care what kind of situation or stress they place the bird in, as long as they get the shot. That's the reality of the world we live in, unfortunately. But I can't say that I agree with nesting, and it brings up a lot of potential issues. If you are going near a nest to photograph it and, you're around those babies or what have you, I mean, you could cause all sorts of stress and fear in the birds. It could cause issues of abandonment, right? Parents could abandon the babies. Something could happen. Going near the nest could perhaps even draw predators. Maybe you're drawing attention to it. Who knows, right? But it can draw predators. And lastly, the other thing that we should be aware of is nesting photography. It all depends on your location and where you are and your state and your city, laws and stuff like that. But going near the nests of birds and doing different could be breaking local laws. So, just from the side of a legal standpoint of breaking the laws and doing something like that, good to know if, this is something you're contemplating trying to do. But I would strongly urge you not to, for the reasons that we just mentioned. We don't want to be putting the birds in any kind of additional danger, right? They've got enough to fear every day in the world of wildlife. And I think we sometimes look at their lives and think, wow, pretty stress-free, right? They've got the life. But the reality is that out in the wild, every day, there is a predator that could come take your life. I mean, that is the reality. So this is why birds, right, are constantly twitching, constantly, not standing still. They're hyper. They live under, a lot of stress. They have to constantly be watching their backs. It's a rough world out there, and no one knows that more than birds. So, let's not do something that adds any kind of additional stress to them or would cause some kind of abandonment of the family of birds. So best thing to me, stay away from nests. Let's leave it to the researchers. Number 3 in the dark side of bird photography is sharing locations. Now, when we're talking about sharing locations, we're talking about birders or photographers that might go in to a location. They see a particular species of bird, and then they start sharing GPS coordinates, or they just start sharing the actual physical location, but provide very specific details as to where they had this experience. This can create all sorts of issues, because if you start to share this type of information and you have a lot of other birders or other, wildlife photographers that start coming to the area, you can have all sorts of issues with, destroying the habitat in that area just because of the over visitation that's going to be going on. And we can't forget that, if someone goes in and sees a species of bird, that is not the only bird or animal that exists in that area, right? There's a lot of wildlife probably going on and in and around that area that this sighting took place. So if we get over visitation situations, it's not just going to ruin it for that one particular bird. It's going to ruin it for everybody that lives in that particular habitat. All sorts of different worlds going on. So we got to be really respectful of these types of things. The best thing to do, really, I think, in this situation, if you see a particular species, is not give out any kind of GPS coordinates and not give out specific locations. And quite honestly, the way birds move, the way birds live their life, they have quite a bit of square mileage that they kind of exist in. So they may be in this one spot today, they might be 20 miles away tomorrow, right? So you don't know. So don't give out something that's going to drive all these people there. Do what the things that we were just talking about with overvisitation and damage to habitats, and that bird's not even there any longer. Maybe they were just passing through. Who knows? The time of year, the species, what have you. They may not even be a permanent fixture in this area. And you've caused a lot of stress to wildlife as a whole. So I don't know about you guys, but I think that's a great thing to avoid. Give very generic things in the area of, let people go figure it out for themselves, right? It's not that you're trying to be, a gatekeeper, and we'll get to that in a few moments, but you're trying to do the respectful thing for wildlife. And I think those are some good steps to take. Number 4, drone photography in bird photography. Whoa, that's a tough one. I don't know about you guys. I'm sure a lot of you out there are familiar with drones and have experience with drones. You might even be, a certified FAA drone pilot like myself. I got my license, but that is not something I would ever use in the course of bird photography. No way. I mean, that is just really asking for trouble, in my opinion, with, causing a serious, potentially fatal injury to not only birds, but other wildlife as well. But obviously with the flying component, we're talking more about birds, right? But I think that's a real dangerous one. Now, if I'm going out, maybe, I've taken you guys on a few trips with me to Boone Hall when I go out to photograph wildlife there. Now, I've never taken my drone there, but I could, and as a YouTube creator, if I wanted to create an additional experience, I could bring my drone and get some, aerial footage of the property that I'm on. And there's a lot of cool things there. So I could probably add some really cool shots, some B-roll footage, from my trip there. And it would just give you guys some more perspective of that location and some different perspective of that location. And drone footage is always cool in a video, right? I'm sure you've all seen tons of videos with it. It can be really cool to add that into your YouTube videos, really entertaining. But I'm not going to put wildlife in the line of fire, if you will, over getting some drone footage. And I'm certainly not going to try to use the drone to maybe fly out to a bird that's out of range of my camera and try to get a photo of them with the drone. I'm never doing that. I mean, I don't care. You know, drones make noise. It's not a noise that birds are accustomed to hearing. It's definitely going to stress them out. It's definitely going to be very disturbing and upsetting to what they're doing every day in the course of their lives. So I don't know about you again, but I'm a hard no on this one. There's just no room in bird photography for using drones. Number 5, birds in captivity. Well, this is one I think, you hear a lot about because there's a lot of wildlife photographers that will take a trip to a zoo and then they create these images and post them online. But the problem is that they're sharing them as though they actually caught these subjects in the wild, especially the birds, right? You might have a bald eagle there. You might have some other cool, species that's flying around. Peacocks are often, seen at zoos, and they're close, and depending on the enclosures they're in, you might be able to get some really good footage of these birds. But it really gives a misrepresentation of wildlife and the art of wildlife and the challenges that come with actually getting these pictures out in the wild. I mean, who here who has experience with wildlife photography? Nothing is that easy typically in wildlife, right? It's a lot of patience, it's a lot of persistence, it's a lot of waiting, and you gotta really know what you're doing to capture good shots in wildlife photography. Having them sitting here in a zoo where there's really nowhere for them to kind of get away, escape from you. They see people all the time. So again, they've kind of what we were talking about in the beginning of the show, they almost become humanized, right? I don't know if that's a word or even an expression. Might mean something completely different than what I think it does, but I think you get my point, right? They become so used to humans that you having a camera pointing at them from a few feet away doesn't really do much to faze them. They're used to it. Not like that out in the wild, right? Very few birds that you can walk up to and, just be a few feet from with a camera and they're going to be like, cool, Most birds are going to be, looking at you like, what are you doing? And every bird has its own little tolerance, but it's pretty close. You get too close, they're gone, right? Shot's over. Now, captivity is one of those things that, I just, if someone says, they went to a zoo and captured these shots, okay, well, of course, right? I'm fine with that. Kind of like the whole AI thing. Yeah, I made this image, using AI. All right, cool. Well, it doesn't count as wildlife photography. Don't enter it in a contest. Don't put it in your portfolio. But if you want to just have some fun and create an image and you're going to be upfront about how you did that, cool. I think we should have an AI contest for wildlife photography, right? Let people who don't want to go out and spend the time doing it, can't afford equipment. There's a million reasons. Let them have fun doing it on AI and have their own little wildlife contests under the category of AI. That's fine. I don't care. The problem arises is when we're crossing the line of AI to real wildlife photography. And I think that's where birds in captivity kind of fall for me. Let me know what you guys think in that one. Number 6, and I touched on this just a short time ago, gatekeeping. Overly competitive, right? It's amazing to me how many photographers really kind of take this elitist kind of approach, right? I found this species here. I'm not gonna share anything I do in the world of wildlife photography. I'm not gonna share the secrets I've learned. I'm not going to share the tips and techniques that I've learned. Right? Obviously, those of us on YouTube aren't like that, right? I mean, that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to share videos of my experiences and the knowledge that I have, and try to share tips and techniques that hopefully something that I share with you is something that you can benefit from, and it's something that can hopefully make you a better photographer somehow, or a more inspired or a more motivated photographer. I just want to be able to give you guys something that helps you to move forward in a positive way. But there's a lot of photographers out there that don't want to do that. They kind of give you that approach of, yeah, I'm not sharing that with you, right? I'm a professional photographer. This is what I do. You need to figure out yourself how to find the birds. And again, we're not saying, give out the specific location, your exact, approach or method for how you captured this species, this subject. But, you don't also have to be a gatekeeper. Not everything is a big secret. This is a whole big world with lots of wildlife, right? And everyone can learn and benefit from each other. We all have different ideas. So I don't know about you guys again, but this is one that I obviously don't agree with. I don't think as photographers that we need to learn information and then become this gatekeeper, or, figure out something about wildlife photography, whether it's an area, whether it's something about a species, whatever it is. Share the information, right? Let's work towards improving the wildlife community as a whole. All right, and the final and last one that we are going to talk about today when it comes to the dark side of bird photography is over-editing and over-cropping. Ooh, this is probably one of the most controversial, I would think. Right? Because people are really going to get into the whole editing and especially cropping thing. How much cropping is too much? Is there such a thing as too much cropping? I think the one thing that I would say, and I don't think that everyone does this with malicious intent, but I think a lot of photographers don't focus enough on getting or I shouldn't say the composition, but a good composition out in the field, right? I think a lot of photographers just kind of shoot without much intention, right? They're not deliberate enough when it comes to composing their images out in the field, and they rely on cropping to basically fix their composition later on. And I think that does two things. One, I think it leads to overcropping, because if you're placing your subject anywhere in the frame, you may have to really do a lot of cropping to get them into a certain composition later on. And of course, maybe instead of taking that shot that you took where the subject is really far away, maybe you need to demonstrate and practice a little bit more patience so that animal, that bird, comes closer to you. And so you can do less cropping, and it would be more in the spirit, I guess, of wildlife photography. Right? Editing shouldn't necessarily always be about fixing everything we did wrong in the field. Yeah, there's going to be times when things happen, right? We talk about this all the time, right? We should always be striving to get physically closer to a bird. But if there's like I've always, say when I'm here, right, in South Carolina, I'm not going into waterways here to get closer to a bird. Most of the water here is infested with alligators. I'm not fighting an alligator for the sake of getting closer to a bird, right? I'm not going to risk my life, right? I mean, obviously. But that being said, maybe if I'm too far and I'm not willing to do those things for those reasons, I have to maybe give up the shot, right? Come back another day, try to figure it out. Try to figure out another way I can perhaps get a little bit closer to the subject. These are all things that we need to consider as photographers. And I know that when we get into the discussion of editing, there's a lot of varying opinions out there as far as what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So I think a lot of people in wildlife photography are pretty okay with excessive cropping, with really heavy cropping. And I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place where that will be applicable, because certainly it will be. But I think we're talking, again, more about those photographers who are using it as a way to fix their poor composition, the fact that they're not really trying to compose the images out in the field in a good way to really create a more interesting photo. But that is another big one. And a lot of photography contests, that is something that you have to really watch, right? You have to really watch how much you crop. You have to really watch how much you edit. You have to show them the raw file and show them your edited file. And if they feel that you have crossed the line of over editing or over cropping or doing any of those things, you're going to be disqualified automatically. All right, guys, those are the 7 things that I wanted to talk about today when it comes to the dark side of bird photography. Again, let me know where you stand on these. Let me know your thoughts, your feelings, what you think is okay, what you think is not okay. I'd love to know. Let me know the thing that really pisses you off when it comes to the dark side of bird photography. I find these types of conversations so interesting. But hey, if you learned something today, if you thought this video was interesting, I would appreciate it if you would give it a thumbs up so that it gets pushed out to more individuals like ourselves who enjoy talking about these things, enjoy learning about these things. And also, while you're here, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That would help me out as well. And I definitely appreciate the support and appreciate you guys being here with me. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Until then, good luck with your wildlife and take care.